What's up, everybody? This is Donnie Stern for deucescrack.com, and I'm bringing you another Zoom No Limit video. I decided to put a little bit lower stakes than usual today. Just trying to mix it up for this series. Gonna do a little low stakes, some higher stakes at 2-5. Um, I just got done losing the last of this W Cube tournaments. Overall, the last 3 weeks pretty much focused mostly on tournaments, just playing W cubes. Turned out to be a poor decision as it went pretty badly. Um, so I guess I should talk a little bit about what I think might be some of the differences that you guys might come across playing 50 cent a dollar games or your 25 cent 50 cent versus maybe some of the tougher games like the 2 cent or $2 $5 games. Um, Fundamentally, in any situation pre-flop, you pretty much want to play as loose as you possibly can, as long as you can still get away with it, right? And so what I mean by that is, if I can profitably 3-bet somebody on the button with 9-6 suited, and when they open the cutoff, then I'm going to be doing that, and I'm going to, if I could profitably do it with 9-5 suited, I would do that too. But the fact is that higher stakes, you probably can't get away with that, so you can't really do that. At lower stakes, some people will let you get away with it. I have absolutely no idea why I checked in the bottom right. This is a C bet for me almost 100% of the time. I guess because I was talking, I wasn't quite focused, and I checked. Just to clarify, bottom right, definitely bet after raising here pre. I don't think raising is bad on the turn, honestly. My hand, honestly, it looks like the only hand I could ever have for value is pocket four, so he might be very skeptical. But still, I'm going to just call. I still have some deceptive value, just calling. Pretty much can call on any blank since I played the flop like such a donkey. So going back to what I was saying, I mean, fundamentally, at lower stakes, you probably can get away with playing looser in certain spots and playing exploitably tighter in certain spots. I mean, if you're playing as more fish, you can do certain things that you never would, make certain tight folds that you never would otherwise. So basically, I'm saying you can get away with playing a little bit more in a vacuum in lower stakes games, and just playing each hand to try to maximize your value. I would also expect players to be less fierce with blind defense at lower stakes. People are going to be much more willing to just give up the blinds, seeing as so many of the professionals at this level are just supernova elite grinders who play nonstop. So I don't have any stats on this guy, first hand played against him. I mix it up between calling and 4-betting here. His 3-bet was a little bit small, so I kind of like 4-betting a little bit better. That's unfortunate. I want to talk about also a concept or a question that a lot of people sort of seem to ask me in forum, and I've gotten this question from students, is, should you adjust to the fact that you're playing Zoom? Is there any way you play differently in 6-mag Zoom versus how you'd play in regular cash games? And I'd say the best way to approach that is not exactly thinking about the question in the way it's phrased. I'm going to give up on the bottom right. I don't think this guy goes check call with a hand that check folds this river. Wow, I won. That's very unexpected. Basically, he raised from the small blind, I called, and then he just check called twice with 9-5 of diamonds on that board. Very, very badly played by him. So anyway, so the question asked is, should you adjust to playing Zoom? Is there anything you should do? And it's not so much that you should ever adjust to playing Zoom specifically. It's just you should consider it as no different of an adjustment than playing in any game where you're going to see how the players are playing, and then you're going to adjust your overall game plan accordingly. If you're playing in a game where everybody's playing way too tight and you can get away with opening more hands, you're going to do that. If you're playing in a Zoom pool that happens to have tons of loose and crazy players, you're gonna adjust to that. So it's more about, in a normal table, you have the opportunity for the most part to just see how everyone's playing, and for the most part, you're playing with the same players over and over again. Uh, I'm going to 3-bet the ace jack here against a tight opener. I mean, he's tight, but it's only 27 hands, so kind of find it hard to justify folding ace jack on the button with position. So anyway, what I'm saying is, any adjustment that you make to Zoom is going to be the same as any adjustment you would otherwise. It's just that it's a little bit harder to do in Zoom because you have to quickly look at see the stats that everyone has at your table, or see their names, how they're, if they're guys you recognize or whatnot. So it's a little bit tougher of an adjustment, but there's no like global Zoom adjustment that you ought to make, I don't think. This is a play I occasionally do. I'm going to donk out here with pocket fours in the bottom right. I'm going to check back the nines on the top right. I know that seems a little bit weak, but it's just a type of spot where I called twice after calling pre, and I just don't think there's really any bluffs I can represent since there's no draw that I could have had on the flop that didn't get there on the turn of river. And I hit my miracle card in the bottom right, a 4. I think actually I maybe should have done something kind of tricky on the turn. Either bet really big or gone for a sneaky check raise. I don't typically go for turn check raises in that spot too often, but one nice benefit of it is that, look, it's a 2 flush draw board. So you stand to gain a whole lot from getting more money in, or allowing yourself the opportunity to get more money in on the turn, against when he has, let's say, ace 8 or something like that, where he might just bet call it off. And he says hard one. Mad Debedip from Israel. Anyway, so it's a spot where I stand to benefit a lot from, checking and him betting, let's say 8-7, and then me having an opportunity to raise, where he sometimes might just fold if I raise, but he sometimes might not, might sack off. And so you kind of gain a lot when you sometimes take the stack of donk line. For those unfamiliar, the stack of donk line is basically the classic way of busting people in like 2005, where basically you would re-raise pre-flop, bet the flop, and then check raise all in on the turn. I had just folded ace 8 off in the cutoff. I didn't really look at the button. That was probably a mistake. I think ace 8 off is right around the border. I'd open it versus most buttons, versus especially good or crazy buttons. I think maybe it's a fold in the cutoff. It seems close. A hand like ace 8, ace 7 probably is comparable to, say, I don't know, 9-10 offsuit, around jack 9 off, something like that. There's probably a few hands that it can compare to. Top right, if the guy had a full stack, I'd be pretty likely to go for a cold 3-bet here, a cold 4-bet. I think this stack is not that good for me to do it against, though. I'm going to 3-bet in the bottom left with Queen 8 of diamonds against this unknown British player. I'd say it's definitely not mandatory. I can do this some percentage of the time, but I don't have to. Queen 8 suited is not good enough that it's an auto 3-bet in this spot. It's also not probably good enough that I can call with it too often. I think you can probably call with it. I was planning on barreling a good amount of turn cards. The 7 of spades is an especially bad turn card to barrel. It's probably only second worst to, I don't know, a jack that puts up a flush draw. Any brick would be a reasonable card to barrel on, because he probably just has lots of pocket pairs, which are going to fold the turn. Any overcards are, of course, great to barrel, because it's unlikely that he floated the flop with just random overs. And if he has something like even King Jack, you know, uh, King Jack is a bad example, but if he has like Jack 10 and a turn comes a King, his hand becomes a whole hell of a lot weaker and pretty much just becomes a bluff catcher. So on that board texture, I'm gonna barrel a decent amount, but not when the 7 of spades comes on the turn. I think I talk a lot about how to decide when to barrel, and what makes a good barreling card and what makes a good hand to barrel with. And a lot of time you'll hear me say things like, well, barrel when you have equity, barrel when you have some sort of semi-bluff. And of course, I believe strongly in that, and I think that it's important that a big part of your bluffing range should be, at least before the river, should be hands that still have decent equity. Because in a lot of spots, you're going to have the opportunity to barrel with so many hands with equity that you can barrel such a high percentage of the time and still have always have at the very least a gut shot, so you don't necessarily need to barrel when you have nothing at all really. But of course, the point I was going to get to. This guy just cold 4-bet me, and I have ace queen suited. He gave me a ridiculously good price. I'm very tempted just to call, but it's just so bad to call the times when he's bluff 4-betting, and I just let him get a free look at his equity basically. I mean, sometimes he's going to call obviously, and that sucks when he has ace king, or pocket kings. And playing with that guy, I obviously don't know who he is. I don't know who anyone are at these stakes. I don't know who anyone is. But what it seemed like an unusually small cold 4-bet. But if it's the first time I play with a guy and he does that, I'm not going to put too much into it because I just don't know exactly how to interpret it. But if I play with him a few more sessions and I see him all of a sudden start making different sizing with his 4-bets, then I'm going to really try to hone in on it and be like, okay, why did he make that small 4-bet? Was it because he had pocket kings? Does he always do that? Why is he all of a sudden now 4-betting to 26 sometimes? I'm going to be much more vigilant about that. The first time though, I'd be careful. I don't know why I just potted it in top left. I meant to just bet small. The first few times though, I might just say, okay, well, whatever. He just picked a number. Don't read too much into it if you don't have too much information. So anyway, going back to the concept I was talking about before, about when to barrel, barreling with good equity, barreling with semi-bluffing hands. I think theoretically, by the way, in the bottom left, this is an okay spot to donk with. I just think that my range is going to be perceived as not very strong if I donk in this spot. So I'm going to check and basically see what he does. Great turn card for me. If he has ace king, I'm probably going to get to stack him. And the way I do that is by check raising the turn. And I'm going to get back to the boards I like to barrel conversation. I obviously wish he bet bigger than $2, but what is nice about them when they sometimes bet so small is that he might think that he's inducing when he bets that small if he has like a king and just will never fold. I like betting kind of big here, just like potting it. Since this guy's probably a fish, I can just do things in a vacuum here. Just bet really big. Don't have to worry about being exploitable. I think he just never folds ace king. Well, it's a little bit unfortunate that he jammed. I don't think I'm over 50% against his jamming range, but I certainly can't fold. Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe I am just over 50% against his jamming range. Absolutely ridiculous play by him. So anyway, back to what I was talking about, how I say, like, I really like when you barrel that you have equity, you have, a draw of some sort, whatever. But somebody brought this up with me the other day, somebody who I was coaching. I sort of neglected to talk about, well, what about when there's just a board that's really dry and there's no conceivable semi-bluffing range for you to have. What happens when you 3-bet and the board comes deuce, deuce, 3 and the turn's a 6? Are you just never bluffing? You can't always just have like ace 4 or ace 5 for the gut shot. That's just not enough. And obviously those boards can be a little bit trickier to play. They become a little bit more of like the sort of the rock paper scissor battle where you kind of know the guy has some medium strength pocket pair type hand, and he knows that you know that, and so then the barreling probably becomes a little bit more about if you're able to try to get a good read on your opponent. And this is where sort of the difference between playing game theory when you're playing against tough opponents versus trying to playing like the leveling game when you're playing against weaker opponents. That's where that can come into play a lot more. A spot where you expect your opponent to have. Oh shit! Sorry, I just misclicked top left, min raised, base 10 off. Actually, in all honesty, this isn't even that bad of a play to be misclick min raising over there. And I flop 2 pair. That's convenient. So anyway, the point I'm making is, so in those spots where you want to try to barrel with some hands that have no equity because, or not necessarily no equity, but don't have a ton of draws, in a spot where you don't have where you don't have a ton of draws in your range, and you want to have a hand that you can barrel with. So when I say taking a game theory approach, I mean game theory approach would basically say that you still have to barrel and bluff in those spots a certain percentage of the time, unless of course your opponent is playing ridiculously exploitable. Well, obviously this is not what game theory would dictate, but if your opponent is playing ridiculously exploitable and it's just never folding, he'll never fold pocket fives when the board comes deuce deuce three, 8 9 or something like that. So anyway, like I was saying, so game theory would dictate that you are going to bluff in certain spots with X percentage of your range, because otherwise you would have if your range is too heavily weighted in bluffs or in in value hands, then you're not going to be doing enough of one or the other, and it's going to be very hard. Or it's going to be very easy for your opponents to exploit you. Obviously, like I said, there's going to be spots where you just are up against a station who will never fold a pair on like a really dry board with nothing super obvious that can beat him. I can't believe I checked back twice here. It's because my time banker is running out. It's very hard to have theory discussions while also playing. I'm sure this is painful for you guys to watch sometimes when I'm talking about something else and I have a hand that's timing out. But it is an important thing to discuss. I think when you're playing at lower stakes, when you're playing 50 cent, dollar, and lower, because I mean even 1-2, like you see a lot of like pretty damn good players at 1-2, which is just ridiculous considering that's the state of the games. You could play 1-2 and party back in the day and win at like 13 big blinds per 100, and now it's like tough to win at greater than 3 per 100 at low stakes games. Anyway, the point I was trying to make is that when you're playing these lower stakes games, one thing that I think is a very effective thing that you should try to do at least is try to experiment. Try to do things a little bit different than your opponents are expecting you to do. And it's something that at higher stakes against better players, I'd say be careful doing that. Be careful having, trying a strategy of only min raising or something like that. Just min raising from every position. Because the fact is, the low stakes players are going to be a little bit less prepared with, how to adjust to that, what to do when your opponent just only min raises from every position. They're not going to know they can play significantly looser, for example, from late position against min raises. They might not adjust fast enough to that. I call the flop. This is, I think, a fairly... This is a spot where I think I usually go check call, and then check decide on the river with the ace 10. I I'm leaning towards folding. Top left over here, I raise pre and then check the flop, and he checked back, and then I check called the turn with just ace high. I think this is good. I think it's rare that he has a hand better than mine on the turn, honestly. I think he bets most of his pairs on the flop. I do think I have to fold, though, on a 9 of clubs river. It's really bad, obviously, for my hand, for my range. So that hand I was talking about, I think that's a fairly standard board to go check, call, and then check decide frequently. That's going to be check fold. I think that folding the turn would be a little bit too weak, and always folding the river would also be a little bit too weak against everybody. You can't just fold the river against everybody. You kind of have to make a bit of a hero call there, occasionally at least, with just ace 10. I don't think you have enough stronger hands in your range that you can always fold ace 10 and always call better hands, for example. And whenever I say a statement like that, where I say, oh, I don't know if you have enough stronger hands in your range, that's sort of a, I don't know what the best word is. I mean, I guess it's sort of game theory, but it's basically, you want to take sometimes, especially in spots where you're unsure what to do, it's important to take a bit of a macro sort of look at your situation, and don't think about it just exactly the hand that you have in the spot that you're in, but think about your range versus your opponent's range, and think about how best to play your range against your opponent's range that'll be difficult for your opponent to adjust to. Okay, if I am not entirely sure how to play against my opponent there, but I always call there with ace 10, I don't know, personally, if I'm playing against somebody and they never fold ace 10 there, I consider that tough, because I don't think I make a hand better than ace 10 there all that often as the opponent, I'm saying. Now, certainly I would not, I mean, I'm exaggerating when I say never. I mean, certainly you have to adjust to the situation and sometimes make full top pair in that spot. But so top left, the guy has somewhat nitty 3-bet stats. 83 hands is not exactly enough to get a good sense of his 4-betting stats. So I'm not sold on the fact that he's super aggro enough that I should 5-bet all in here. But I also definitely don't think ace queen is weak enough that I can fold to the 4-bet cutoff first button. So what do? I'm going to call. I think my hand needs to be a little bit stronger to jam. I think my hand, it doesn't play like the best or anything in a 4-bet pot when my opponent frequently will have jacks plus or ace king, but it plays great against all the times when he doesn't have those hands, when he has the funny hands. When he's 4-bet bluffing, my hand plays great against them. So it's tough. It's a tough spot to play when you think your opponent might be really strong, but you're not sure. And then you have a hand like ace queen or like pocket tens. It can be really tough to play. I'm not, for the most part, I think when he checks twice, he's pretty likely to have some reasonable showdown strength hand. I just find it hard to believe that he would 4-bet and then give up on a jack 4-5 board with a flush draw. I could be wrong. I mean, for all I know, this is a terrible check back. I can't bet a 9. I just don't think he folds a pair enough. I think he's going to have something like 10 slot when he takes his line. I mean, it's king 6. I think his check on the flop is completely and utterly absurd. I mean, not only is this a board that I would just c-bet close to 100% in that spot in a 4-bet pot because of the fact that I mean, fundamentally, continuation bets are about, or betting in general on the flop or on the turn when you don't have anything, but you have sort of the quote unquote initiative. What the initiative really means is in that spot is that his range is stronger than my range on that board. He for the most part, this isn't entirely true, but for the most part, my range is more capped than his is. I technically can have aces and kings and queens here. I do sometimes slow play in this spot. But he's way more likely to have strong hands on this flop than I am. And I think check folding, even like a no equity hand here, like even if he had something like 8-9 of spades, I think he still should bet it on the flop on this specific board. But on top of that, he had king 6 of diamonds. That's a pretty damn, I mean, I'm not gonna say it's like a great flop or anything for king 6 of diamonds. But I mean, jack 4-5, he has a backdoor flush draw, backdoor straight draw, and he only has king high. His hand is pretty much good enough that that he kind of wants to see a turn card. I mean, he doesn't want to see a turn card, but it's good. It's definitely good enough that he can bet. And if I call, it's not exactly the end of the world if I call. He has a ton of turn cards that he can barrel with good equity. He's not going to be worried about. I mean, first of all, he can just bet the turn. And a lot of time, I'm going to call. And anytime he turns a straight draw or a flush draw, he can probably just go all in on the turn, and it will have good fold equity, like real solid, decent amount of fold equity. I can have lots of hands that I call the flop with and fold the turn. A lot of time I'm going to call the flop with something like Ace Queen with a club in my hand, or I can be just doing something silly and float with King Queen or something like that. Not that I do that often, but it's possible. Bottom left, I flatted the 3-bet, a little bit of a slow play, but the guy has kind of nitty stats and is in the small blind, and I raised from under the gun, so I don't expect him to be super loose here. I think this is a spot where I can actually call the turn, even though there's so little behind. There's only half pot left in the river. I think it's a spot where, because when I call the turn, it looks like I have an ace so often, I get my opponent to play really straightforward on the river. I am tempted to bluff this river because I think a lot of time when somebody takes this line and checks the river, they're check folding like 90%. But because it's a queen, I'm afraid he just river to queen, but he also can have, I was about to say, he also can have kings that decided to bet, which I certainly would try to get him to fold if I knew he had that. But really what I was afraid of is that he had ace king and for some reason decided to check. I don't think that's an unreasonable thing for him to do. Or it's not unreasonable, at least for me to expect him to do that. About that hand, the more obviously that I think that he can have kings in that spot when I check back the river, the more I'd be likely to turn my hand into a bluff there. I think he folds kings on the river there, but you never know, obviously. Sometimes they just make the most ridiculous calls ever. Bit of a tough spot here. I'm going to call blind versus this guy, the jacks. I checked back the flop, called the turn, called the river. That's a spot where I think most good players would give up on the river, but based on his stack and his stats, I just didn't think he was good, so I thought there's a chance he'd be making some kind of silly bluff, so it turned out to be right. When this video is almost over, I'm going to try to pull up some 2 hands that I played today that I'm not sure if I played well or if I maybe made a couple of mistakes. All of the decisions I think were pretty close. These are hands from the W Coop main event today that I know obviously this is not a tournament video, but I think it's important to talk about all forms of poker that you might play. I don't consider myself a tournament player per se. I think I feel much more loyal to the cash game title. That I am more of I prefer playing cash games, but I try not to think about stuff like that too much. I just think play whatever you want to play in poker as long as you enjoy it and you can make money off of it. Or fuck, I mean, even if you don't enjoy it, just play it if you can make money off of it. If it's what you do for a living and you want to do it. And we got interesting spot in the top left. I mean, interesting only a little bit because it was a strange action, but I'm not ever folding, obviously. Our opponent back raised after I 3-bet in the opener, cold called. Really just a no-brainer jam. I was about to say sometimes when he takes this line, he's going to have aces or kings. But it's important not to get results oriented in these spots. I mean, you see all sorts of weird stuff when people do this. Sometimes they'll back raise fold, which if they do that too much, you can really just jam on them a lot there. If they're back raise folding a lot, I'm gonna call top right hand. All right. I'm going to do couple more hands, and then I'm going to switch over and start talking about some of the tournament hands I played today. We're going to see bet kind of small in the bottom left. There's no real reason to bet big here in this spot. Going to barrel here on the bottom right with my nut flush draw. I like betting kind of big here. Betting kind of big, I don't know. Part of the thing is you bet big, and then you usually limit your opponent to not having any of the really weaker hands in his range. Like, when I bet big on the turn, I expect him to pretty much always fold 5s through 8s. But on the other hand, if I bet small, I get to let him sometimes do something silly, like call again with those hands, and then I get to bluff him on the river. But since I bet kind of big on the turn, I think his range is more limited towards King X hands. And it's obviously sometimes he's going to have, Queen X of hearts or 9X of hearts or something. And I don't know that I can get that to fold. But I think once he calls the turn, when I bet kind of big, I have to kind of give up with my hand because he's just going to have a king too often. I'm going to look for those hands really quick. We'll just take a second. All right. That didn't take long. I found the hand. Okay, so I raise pre with ace-10 off here. I'm going to c-bet on this board. I don't usually c-bet too often on a board like this with nothing, but I have got shot. I have ace-high, so it's a good spot to c-bet. Okay. Here we go. So this is from the $5,000 main event, W Cube event from today. And early on in the tournament, I got down real low. I played a couple of just really brutal hands when we were super deep, and ended up at some point I was down to 3,000 when the blinds were like 160, 120, and then I ran it back up to 30K. And then this hand happened against old time Jin, who the only thing I know about him at the time is that he's a heads of sit and go player. I think I wasn't sure about that. That was what somebody told me. I don't know too much about him, honestly. I expect him to probably know a little bit more about me than I knew about him. So I opened under the gun with ace queen off to 2.5x. I think you can't get too carried away with the the standard tournament play of min raising when the stacks are this deep. And he 3-bets me. I think my options are call and call really with ace queen. You'd have to have a really, really crazy dynamic to do anything other than call here. I think you'd have to be, in order to be in a 4-bet call it off situation here. That would be really crazy. So I call. He was playing fairly. His stats were reasonable. He was 3-betting a decent amount, playing probably like a reasonable amount of hands. He wasn't playing too crazy or anything. It comes king queen 10, rainbow. Pretty much a check call once, and then probably fold the turn situation if he c-bets, but he checks back. I expect him to definitely check back some strong hands in this flop sometimes. This is a flop where you see people check back pocket aces, pocket jacks, obviously sometimes. Ace king he can have. I expect him to sometimes have something like king jack. I don't think it's like a he's giving up or anything type situation. So the turn I obviously want to check. For the times when he doesn't have anything, I want to give him a chance to bet. And I'm still probably not doing that great against his range, honestly. I mean, he has a lot of pocket aces, a lot of ace king, a lot of king jack, and then when he has something like 9-10, it's not like I'm in a situation where I can get two streets of value from him now. So I still want to play my hand very cautiously and probably check call and then usually check fold the river. All right, so he bets 2,900 on the turn. I call as planned. And this river hits. Well, clearly I think checking is the best play right now. I check, and then he tanks. He tanks for a little while and bets 5,000. And right away, my first instinct was, you should go all in. I think I represent a very reasonable amount of flushes. I definitely would take this line. I expect him to expect me to take this line with stuff like King Jack of clubs, 10x of clubs is definitely. I would definitely take this line with something like Ace 10 of clubs, probably Jack 10 of clubs. There's no real reason to bet the turn. He's just going to always call if he has a better pair. I want to be able to keep some of his nothing hands in his range, so I wouldn't bet Jack 10 of clubs on the turn. Same thing with 9-10 of clubs. Obviously, I can't represent something like Ace 7 of clubs or Ace 9 of clubs because first of all, I might have folded some of those. I might have folded something like Ace 7 of clubs to his 3-bet, and I would never check call that hand on the turn. I almost certainly would. That's not necessarily true. I might check call something like that on the turn, but I'm much more likely to just bet that on the turn, since I don't really benefit when I have Ace 9 of clubs from keeping his crappy hands in going to the river. I benefit much more by just betting and sometimes getting him to fold a 10 or something like that. Okay, so now I've established what I can represent. Then you have to think about what is he representing? What can he have? Now, part of the problem is he definitely can have a flush. I expect him usually to bet bigger here, but he's probably a professional poker player. He's probably pretty smart. There's a good chance he would understand that it's important to sometimes bet something like 5K here with a flush. First of all, because he might be inducing from my Queen Jack type range. He also, if he wants to stay consistent with his bluffs, it's reasonable for him to bluff with this sizing here, because the fact is I'm probably just not calling with Queen Jack, Jack 10, Ace Queen, stuff like that in the river. I mean, I would consider it, and a lot of people probably would call here with Ace Queen, but he might be able to just get me to fold for that price with that sizing when I have something like what I have. So I think if he's expecting that, and he's expecting me to expect that, it can be consistent with his range to sometimes bet this amount with something as good as his flush. And then the question is, one of the things that I was worried about when he did this, and I thought about, okay, maybe I should jam here. I thought, wow, if I jam, will he think that he induced the jam because he bet so small in the river? So is he going to just call when he has Ace King? I was worried about that. And so ultimately, the table was also pretty soft. And the whole tournament was just ridiculously soft. I mean, there was like 1,800 people entered. I thought it was maybe a little bit marginal to do it. And I thought basically what it came down to was I just wasn't sure that I could even get him to fold Ace King. I mean, I expect most people to usually fold Ace King if you check jam this river. But I thought, okay, maybe he would just hero call me with Ace King. And then on top of that, he still can have King X of clubs. Like, he can have something like King 9 of clubs here, definitely. He can have 10X of clubs, definitely. He can have, 10-7 of clubs or something like that. So because of that, the fact that A, he could have had some nut hands, and I was worried about that, and B, I wasn't even sure that I could get him to fold his marginal hands, I decided not to bluff. And I ended up busting a little while later, and I didn't really think about my bust out hand, but I thought about this hand for a while, thinking about whether or not I should have made that bluff. And I'm not really convinced one way or the other. I'm not really sure what would have went down. I mean, for all I know, he had King 9 of clubs and would have snapped me off, and then I would have been pissed. All right, here's the other hand. I very nearly jammed here. Obviously, under the gun opening, the small blind 3-betting is one of the least desirable spots to cold 4-bet jam something like ace queen in the big. I'd rather, if the guy was in the button had 3-bet, I would not even think about it. I would definitely just jam. But I don't expect him to have like a super wide 3-betting range in this spot, and his stats at the time were somewhat passive pre-flop. Although I'm pretty sure that's, I don't know if I'm supposed to say, but I'm pretty sure that's Ben Grundy. Somebody told me that, who's like a crazy PLO player. But playing no limit, he wasn't playing crazy at all. He didn't 3-bet that much. And the under the gun player, who's a regular that I recognize, but I don't really know too much about how he plays, had been playing somewhat tight, although he'd only been at the hit table for a few hands. So I wasn't really worried too much about under the gun. I think if I cold 4-bet all in, he's folding. He's folding some good hands. I mean, he's probably not folding jacks plus or anything like that, or probably not even tens plus. But compared with his opening range, I mean, he's folding a lot of he's folding a lot of pocket pairs. Probably always folding deuces through eights. Probably folding nines. So I have a ton of fold equity over him. And then the question is, when I jam, how am I doing against this guy's range? It's extremely close, and I decided to fold. I'm really, really not sure about it. I thought it was a very tough spot. And the other guy folded, so I didn't get to see what they had. And then the very next hand, this guy opened onto the gun, and the difference in this spot from the other one is that this guy was playing really crazy. And he was opening a lot of hands, especially in early position he had been opening. So when it got back to me, I decided to just rip it in with sixes, even though he opened from under the gun. The fact is, it's only 23 big blinds. This was a really standard hand, I thought. He happened to have nines and didn't even snap call me. But those are the three hands I thought were. Honestly, this hand's not that interesting. The last hand was kind of interesting, and the first hand I thought was very interesting that I wanted to share for today. Okay, well, that's it. And for questions and comments, post in the video thread. And for deucescrack.com, this is Donnie Stern. Thanks, guys.